What single human has done the most damage to the progression of humanity in the history of mankind?
Guy de Chorliak. He was a surgeon in the 1300s who vehemently spoke out against another fellow surgeon, Theodoric Borgognoni. Theodoric was a surgeon who wrote about his theories on proper wound care and believed that the best thing you can do to a wound is wrap it and keep it clean. Guy hated what Theodoric was writing because it directly went against the teachings of Galen, an ancient Greek surgeon who believed pus was the body's way of balancing your humors. Guy's teachings were widely accepted, and it's believed that his ignorance set the development of antisepsis in surgery back about 600 years. Edit. Guy de Chorliak was born in the 1300s, not 1200s, as he was alive during the Black Death. Ignaz Semmelweis was the guy who was thrown into a mental asylum for saying surgeons should wash their hands between seeing patients.
Oh man, I only knew Guy de Chorliak from his super awesome records of the Black Death. I didn't know he did this. Bummer.
There's an awesome podcast called Behind the Bastards that is basically all about deconstructing the worst people in history. Would recommend it to anyone interested in this thread.
Op is compiling a hit list for their time-traveling journeys.
Asterisk, I just want to talk with them, asterisk.
Purportedly, the unnamed inventor of flexible glass, Vitrum Flexile, brought a drinking bowl made of the material before Tiberius Caesar. The bowl was put through a test to break it, but it merely dented, rather than shattering. The inventor repaired the bowl easily with a small hammer, according to Petronius. After the inventor swore that he was the only man alive who knew the manufacturing technique, Tiberius had the man executed. He feared that the glass would devalue gold and silver, since the material might be more valuable. Link.
What an idiot. TC had access to what he thought was worth more than gold and silver, so rather than claiming this new flexiglass material for his own benefit in the name of the empire, or whatever, he wipes it out of existence?
Robert Maxwell, father of Ghislaine. The man was the leading cause of paywalled scientific articles today. Before him, science publishing was relatively open. He helped shape the industry into the cancer on academia it is today. Edit. Quite the thing to wake up to. Thanks everyone. For those interested, I found an article that details the events pretty well. The TLDR version is that through use of PR marketing, exclusivity deals, and copyright law, Maxwell through Pergamon Press turned scientific publishing from a relatively non-profit-driven endeavor to a predatory industry that charged institutions out the nose for research they paid nothing for. Check out Alexandria and Sci-Hub. They've definitely helped many people who can't access scientific research. Video on Sci-Hub, link. Article, link.
The Maxwells really a CS.
Emperor Gaozong of China. This is kind of an obscure story, so let me tell you the whole thing. It was the 12th century. When people talk about how China used to be the most technologically advanced part of the world, this is the period they're talking about. Some historians that they were on the brink of industrializing. Then Manchuria invaded and conquered northern China. The imperial court retreated to the south and declared Gaozong, the emperor's brother, as the new emperor. China's top general Yu Fei, who, according to some records, literally had patriotism tattooed on his back, though that might have been made up by someone who wanted to emphasize how unfair the rest of this story is, rallied his army and defeated the Manchus, and was raring to chase them out, but he gets orders from Gaozong to back down, because he'd rather negotiate. These negotiations end up signing away the north half of China. A few years later, the Manchus invade again. Yu Fei beats them again and pushes all the way back to the old capital, Kaifeng. Then he gets the order to retreat. He responds with a letter saying that he's got the Manchus on the ropes, and he can reconquer northern China in like a month. No, says the emperor, retreat immediately. Eventually, Yu Fei does retreat, but he delays long enough to evacuate the city first, making up some logistical issues as an excuse. At this point, you may be wondering why Gaozong was so reluctant to push an advantage. The answer is that his brother was still alive. The king of Manchuria liked to bring him out once in a while and make fun of him. If Yu Fei reconquered China, he might liberate the rightful emperor, and Gaozong would be out of a job. As such, Gaozong was actively trying to throw the war. And he interpreted Yu Fei's delay at the end of this war as meaning that he had reached the point of at least considering going rogue, so as soon as Yu Fei got back, he was arrested, and promptly executed on treason on the ground of error. He might have done something. Presumably because the optics on the actual charge, almost winning a war we wanted to lose, were too bad. People realize that this is bull quickly enough, and there are protests, but Gaozong manages to pin everything on one of his advisors and placated the mob by executing him. So how does this affect the long-term progression of humanity? Well, as I said, China might have been on the brink of industrializing at the time, but didn't have access to enough coal. There are coal deposits in China, but they're all in the north. Second, the Manchus never really got their internal issues sorted out, and 70 years later, were easily conquered by the Mongols, who then recruited a bunch of disaffected Chinese siege engineers. This essentially removed the one weakness of horse archer hordes: they're not good at taking fortresses, and allowed them to wreck half the world. Had China been united at the time, and had been ruled fairly recently by a guy who had, if you recall, been taken prisoner by invaders from the north, so you can bet the defenses would be fairly well maintained, they probably could not have done this. So had it not been for the malice of this one man, the Mongols would probably never have become the juggernaut they eventually did, and the Industrial Revolution might have happened about 500 years ahead of schedule.
Fun speculation for sure, but FYI to anyone reading this, OP kinda oversimplifies the causes and requirements of an industrial revolution, namely that they imply that having coal kickstarts it and is required for it. I want to remind readers that the Industrial Revolution didn't just suddenly jump to factories and steam power, but began with things like the cotton gin and the power loom.
Yongle, emperor of the Ming dynasty in China, ordered the fleet of Zhenghe, the greatest trading and exploration fleet of the time, to be burned during his reign in the early 1400s. This was the beginning of an era of isolation for Chinese kingdoms, which ultimately led to the collapse of Imperial China, and indirectly to the rise of the PRC. Additionally, the wealth of the world overall decreased as a result of reduced trade with China, and if China had continued exploring, it is possible that they, not Europeans, would have colonized North America, instead of merely maybe discovering it then telling no one as they did in history. It may not be a significant alteration of human progress, but it's one of those events that sets the world in a definitively different direction. Edit. Didn't say the Chinese did discover America, just that they might have because it's been theorized that they did and they had the technology. I mean, the Inuit and Siberians have been crossing the Bering Sea in leather kayaks for thousands of years, so the Chinese definitely could have done it too if they wandered up that far. I don't know much about the actual history of that theory, and most of my comments on that are from Wikipedia searches this morning and willingness to believe fun, hidden history, scenarios that are actually possible. Thanks for all the upvotes.
As a caveat, it would have hugely changed naval history too. It would be accurate to say that Europeans and their methods of sailing enabled European-led globalization and colonization. The durability of their designs, relative speed and range were critical developments with a measurable impact on the world. But, really, the Chinese had a totally different system which would have really worked just as well, if not better. European ships were relatively small and had canvas sails, while the great Chinese ships that Zhenghe used were massive, and used these kind of folding bamboo sails, ingenious for their strength and manageability. They even had watertight compartments, something European ships didn't even consider using for centuries. Both parts of the world produced ships that could do what the other kind did, while looking extremely different. So as a maritime history buff, I'm totally fascinated by how things on the high seas would have looked had the Yongle Emperor not stifled Chinese naval expansion in the cradle. Edit. Book recommendations are Anything by Brian Lavery and Robert Gardiner.
If China had begun to colonize the New World around the mid to late 1400s, the Europeans wouldn't be prevented from doing the same from the West around the same time. European and Far Eastern civilization would compete in the Americas.
I would suggest Andrew Wakefield. His work ileal lymphoid nodular hyperplasia, non-specific colitis, and pervasive developmental disorder in children, has been directly responsible for the mistrust of vaccines, the decline of Western rates of vaccination, and basically telling everybody that there's a boogeyman underneath your bed. He is directly responsible for thousands and thousands of deaths. He's a scientist who made a mistake. Why are you blaming him? It's not that he made a mistake. He had purposely customized the outcomes to meet the hypothesis so that he could get rich selling safe vaccines and diagnostic kits. He poisoned the well that saved so many people just so he could get rich. I have no idea how he can sleep at night. On balance, vaccines may be the greatest human accomplishment of all time.
People in developed countries really have no idea how bad disease has been for most of human history, precisely because of the success of vaccines and antibiotics. The vast majority of human deaths for most of our existence has been from disease. And for one brief century, we managed to push it back to the fringes of our awareness. But antibiotic resistance and anti-vaxxers seem determined to bring us back to the old standard. It really is such a huge slap in the face to take a look at this technology that has saved billions of lives, the pinnacle of human achievement, and just say, F you.
Greater than it really is such a huge slap in the face to take a look at this technology that has saved billions of lives, the pinnacle of human achievement, and just say, F you. It's just so much worse than that. It's not F you to vaccines. Wakefield isn't a stupid man. His goal was to usurp vaccine manufacturers so that he could own that business. To label other vaccines as dangerous, and patent a safer approach to them. In order to do so, he introduced the autism boogeyman. Autism is caused by gut problems. Vaccines cause the gut problems. I have vaccine technology that doesn't cause these problems. Ipso facto, if you don't want your kids to get autism, you need to use my vaccines. His was a two-step plan. 1. Rattle everybody's confidence in existing vaccines. 2. Introduce his own brand of vaccines that were safe. The problem was, he was fully interrupted in the middle. He found ways to echo his propaganda throughout soccer moms, Playboy models, the elite, and the paranoid conspiracy theorists. He dramatically shook the establishment. By the time he had rounded the corner to get to step 2, his fraud was uncovered, his findings were retracted, and he was disgraced by the establishment. Except that in the modern environment, disgraced by the establishment makes him good bedfellows with Trumpians and the like. There are very few people on this earth who have a body count like this man.
The Ottoman caliphs who banned the printing press in the Muslim world. That's exactly how you destroy a civilization.
Wow. That's like erasing the potential of millions of minds. Who knows what may have come from someone becoming literate enough to explain their ideas back then. I'd be thinking this onto a screen from Titan right now.
Sheikh al-Islam. I heard of this guy after hearing someone on TV complain about how this man set the Islamic world back by centuries. In 1515, the age of the Ottoman Empire, he, a learned scholar of the kingdom, issued a decree that forbid printing, press, and made using it punishable by death. Edit. Grammar, more context.
Wiki, in the year 1515, Sheikh al-Islam of the Ulama, learned scholars, issued a fatwa that printing was haram, forbidden. As a result, Ottoman Sultan Selim I issued a decree of a death penalty on anyone using the printing press. The fatwa has been attributed as one of the reasons for the stagnation of knowledge, invention and discovery in the Muslim world, at a time when Europe was in the midst of the Renaissance period. It seems that Sheikh al-Islam is a title though, not a name.
That stupid fish that decided to leave water.
The sun is a deadly laser.
ITT. Our bad history as far as the eye can see.
The only thing humans really learn by studying their history is that humans do not learn from their history.
Bakhtiar Khilji. Hands down. In 12th century there was the world's biggest university in India named Nalanda, where intellectuals from all around the world used to study. Then Turks invaded India under Khilji. They killed almost all the intellectuals and destroyed the university. And they burnt the library. The library continued to burn for 3 months. This has to be by far the biggest loss to mankind IMO.
Same as Sunny Ali, Songhai King who couldn't read or write, and this inferiority complex led him to conquer and burn down Timbuktu and killing all scholars that didn't manage to escape.
Sir Mark Sykes. This man was the British element in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. For those of you not in the know, 100 years ago the Middle East was an area that did have some nations and some more tribal areas. So people were more divided by language and culture, some by religion. France and Britain decided to carve up the Middle East into easier to govern territories, but fumbled this task and instead divided the territories on the map over these religious and tribal lines. Not only has this been a main contributing cause of conflict in the Middle East, if you take two opposing or rival groups and then suddenly group them as one country, what do you expect? But said conflicts have then fueled further conflicts again and again. This has then been further used by Islamic extremists as a reason to hate the Western powers, as they were the ones who created this terrible agreement. Even Sykes himself accepted that the agreement's wording should be changed in order to give those countries autonomous rule. What is a little sad is he actually seemed to want to help these regions with the agreement, but just bumbled the whole thing, which has led to most of the issues the Middle East has to this day. Sykes didn't make the modern Middle East though, he just played a large part in creating the circumstances in which its current problems thrive. Imagine all of the advancement, education and collaboration that could have happened had the Middle East been allowed to flourish unhindered and without resentment.
The problem is Sykes Pico f'd it up so badly that if you look at a tribal or religious map of the time, it's so bad that it looks intentional. Like, not a single country that's unified by anything.
A lot of people don't seem to understand the question. It's not who did bad thing or who I hate more. It's who hindered the progress of humanity the most.
People just don't want to understand.
Edward Bernays. He created modern-day PR, which set the blueprint on how to control the masses by deception.
He was Sigmund Freud's nephew and basically applied his theories to marketing.
Because of the butterfly effect, UG. If UG hadn't hit Bog with that rock in 200000 BC, we'd be a galaxy-spanning utopian civilization by now.
Remember what Bog said while dying? Aga Gai Gba Bung. He could have done so much for humanity.
There are two answers here, the ones who are serious and truly answer the question, and the ones who states a modern person they just don't like.
You, Alpha_Pro 2019 is probably the single worst human in history. Just kidding, you seem cool.
Thomas Midgley Jr. Almost everything he invented has seriously harmed humanity. With his inventions, Thomas Midgley Jr. contributed to the poisoning of 3 generations of children, increased the risk of skin cancer and other skin problems related to exposure to UV rays, and contributed greatly to global warming. Link.
Wow. Was responsible for adding lead to gasoline and freon gas to fridges. Then, after contracting polio and becoming paralyzed, he died by getting choked by an elaborate pulley system he invented to get himself in and out of bed. Cyril of Alexandria is a pretty good bet. Link. He organized murder squads to go around Alexandria killing anyone who wasn't a die-hard Christian. This included nearly every great mind of the era. One in particular was Hypatia of Alexandria, one of the greatest minds in history. She invented a working steam engine nearly a millennia before the first steam locomotive. He is of course considered a saint by Catholicism and the Church of England. Edit. It was Hero that invented the steam engine. Chill y'all, I just woke up to 100 damn replies. Her writing did survive, just not intact. Much of it within the treatise of Theon, her father a great astronomer in his own right. Wikipedia is not infallible.
Yes. Easily in the top 5 of worsts and ever. Alexandria was pretty advanced in astronomy and mathematics at that time. We could have advanced so much quicker without him. F him. And F all the people that make him a saint.
Whoever gave the order to burn the Library of Alexandria?
From what I understand, the library was actually copied out or had texts removed prior to the burning. Or so went a post on r. Ask Historians a bit back. Wikipedia. Link.
That monk who glued a page of geometry and algebra together to write prayers on it instead. Set the world of maths back about 300 and 400ths of a year. Edit. Here you go. A Greek monastery held the papers for a whole, then it was overwritten with prayers. Link. Edit. While not whole.
I think I've read several theories about this, however, that make this far less impactful than the popular narrative suggests it is. 1. This was unlikely to be the only copy of Archimedes' work, especially as even in Constantinople it was very far from its place of origin. 2. Monasteries in general were wont to protect any kind of text, and not merely those that were religious in nature. The fact then that they chose to overwrite this suggests that they did not believe this to be a particularly uncommon text at the time, lending further credence to point 1. 3. There were many other texts in the palimpsest other than Archimedes' Codex C, which one could make an equal argument as to the importance of. The choice of exalting one at the expense of all the others is technically just as much an overwriting, especially given the fact that it was not uncommon to write over expensive parchment at the time. 4. The work was overwritten only 700 years after it was first written. This makes it very unlikely to have been instrumental in any mathematical advancement had it not been overwritten regardless. 5. The fact that this manuscript survived, while few, if any, other copies of Archimedes' work survived, is less a testament to monks' persistent overwriting, but more to do with how well taken care of the palimpsest was. Compare its fate in the 700 years it was in the possession of the Church to what happened in the next 100 years alone. One could also ask what happened to every other copy of Archimedes' Codex C. That's at least my layman understanding of the matter. I might not be correct on all the details, but it's at least not as cut and dry as one errant monk erasing a few hundred years of mathematics.
Genghis Khan. While he personally didn't do much to hinder human progress, his reign began an era of Mongol expansionism and devastation, and his successes were responsible for the destruction of the House of Wisdom of Baghdad, ending the Islamic Golden Age, and not to mention the destruction of numerous cities and the deaths of many. Also, the Mongol Empire eventually paved the way for the Black Death. The empire led to many trade routes being formed between Europe and Asia, which eventually led to the transmission of the Black Death to Europe in the 14th century.
As terrible as the Black Death was, it was actually the primary driver of change that led Europe out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. The Renaissance basically kick-started modern civilization. Greater than the Black Death led to a great questioning of the old certainties. This led many, especially among the urban elite, to use reason to understand the world. Greater than the high mortality rate resulted in a drastic decline in the labor force. 7. Wages rose for both agricultural and urban workers. The survivors of the Black Death generally had a higher standard of living than before the plague. 8. This phenomenon occurred in both urban and rural areas. The crisis caused by the Black Death led to many changes in the economy in response to the fall in the population. Because of the labor shortages, there was a move from labor-intensive farming such as cereal to livestock and an increase in industry and agriculture, more labor-saving devices employed. Greater than in the period after the Black Death, an unprecedented amount of social mobility took place. Laborers became merchants, and merchants become members of the nobility. No longer was a person's destiny to be fixed by their birth. Previously, people assumed that one's station was fixed at one's birth and that one had to remain a member of the class you were born into. 24. People believed that a peasant would always be a peasant, an aristocrat, and an aristocrat. Italians, like other peoples, in Europe, believed that one's birth determined one's future and that this was determined by God. 25. Greater than, however, as social mobility became more widespread because of the Black Death, many people believed that a person's merits or abilities were what mattered and not one's birth. Link. Nazir the Copper Merchant. Our first written texts could have been amazing accounts of how life was at the time. Instead they're just people giving bad reviews on Bronze Age Amazon.
Listen, the copper was not up to scratch and he had a right to complain. Whoever seized all of Nikola Tesla's chests and papers after he died?
While Tesla was a good engineer and made some significant contributions in his field, he was not some genius who was ahead of his time that some internet cultists like to believe. He lacked the background of rigorous scientific methods and refused to accept modern physics. One of the reasons why many of his inventions didn't work out is because they couldn't, because of his misconceptions about how laws of physics work.
Thank you for watching. We upload new videos every day, so be sure to come back for more fun. Please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video.